Marcus had always believed that life's greatest challenges came with clear instructions, like the engineering blueprints he worked with every day. But staring at his 7-year-old daughter Emma as she sat quietly in the hospital waiting room, her small hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on the floor, he realized that some problems couldn't be solved with calculations and careful planning. 3 months had passed since the accident that took Sarah, and Marcus felt like he was drowning in a sea of responsibilities he never imagined he'd face alone. The morning started like any other since Sarah's death, with Emma barely speaking and Marcus fumbling through breakfast preparation. He'd burned the toast again, and when he offered it to Emma with a forced smile, she simply shook her head and pushed the plate away. The silence between them had become a third presence in their small apartment, heavy and suffocating. Marcus knew he was failing her, but every attempt at conversation felt clumsy and inadequate. How do you explain to a child that you're learning how to be both mother and father simultaneously, that you're terrified of making the wrong choices, that you miss her mother just as desperately as she does? Work had become his refuge, the one place where problems had solutions and his expertise mattered. But even there, his colleagues had begun to notice his distraction. Project deadlines that once seemed manageable now felt insurmountable, and he found himself staying late not because the work demanded it, but because going home meant facing the reality of his new life. Emma would be with Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor who had kindly offered to watch her after school. The arrangement worked practically, but Marcus could see the questions in Emma's eyes every evening when he picked her up. Why was he always late? Why couldn't things be the way they used to be? The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in October. Marcus had promised Emma they would visit the park after dinner, a rare attempt at creating a normal father-daughter moment. But a crisis at work kept him until nearly 8 o'clock, and by the time he arrived at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, Emma was already in her pajamas, her face streaked with tears she'd tried to hide. She didn't say anything during the short walk to their apartment, and when Marcus tried to explain about the work emergency, she simply nodded and went to her room. Through the thin walls, he could hear her crying herself to sleep, and the sound broke something inside him that he hadn't known was still intact. That night, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since grown cold, staring at a photo of Sarah holding newborn Emma. In the picture, Sarah was laughing at something outside the frame, her hair messy and her hospital gown wrinkled, but her joy was radiant and infectious. Marcus remembered taking that photo, remembered feeling like his life had finally found its true purpose. Now, he felt like he was failing both of them, the living and the dead. The next morning brought an unexpected encounter that would change everything. Marcus was running late again, rushing Emma through breakfast and gathering his work papers when he realized he'd forgotten to pack Emma's lunch. In his haste to throw something together, he accidentally grabbed an expired yogurt from the back of the refrigerator. It wasn't until he was dropping Emma off at school that he noticed the mistake, but by then there was no time to fix it. He promised himself he'd call the school later to make sure she had something to eat. But the morning's meetings ran long, and by the time he remembered, it was already past lunchtime. The call came at 2:30 in the afternoon. Emma had been found crying in the bathroom by her teacher, Miss Peterson, who gently explained that Emma had been too embarrassed to tell anyone she had no lunch and had been hiding her hunger all day. The shame Marcus felt was overwhelming, but it was nothing compared to the devastation in Emma's eyes when he arrived at the school to pick her up. She didn't cry or complain. She just looked at him with a resignation that was far too mature for her 7 years, and he realized that his daughter was learning not to expect much from him. Driving home in silence, Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of heading to their apartment, he turned toward the downtown area, toward a part of the city he rarely visited. Emma noticed the change in direction but didn't ask where they were going. She'd learned not to ask questions that might lead to disappointment. Marcus wasn't entirely sure what he was looking for, but he felt drawn to move, to break the pattern of their isolated routine, to find something that might help him connect with his daughter again. They ended up at a small community center that Marcus had noticed during his commute but never really paid attention to. The building was older, with brick walls and large windows that let in the afternoon sunlight. A handwritten sign by the entrance advertised various programs, including something called family cooking classes that met every Wednesday evening. Marcus stared at the sign for a long moment, remembering how Sarah used to cook with Emma, how their kitchen would fill with laughter and the smell of whatever experiment they were attempting. He'd always been too busy or too tired to join them, claiming that cooking wasn't his strength. Now, he wished desperately that he'd paid attention to those moments instead of dismissing them as Sarah's domain. Emma tugged on his sleeve, bringing him back to the present. She was looking up at him with curiosity for the first time in weeks, and he realized she was interested in the colorful posters decorating the community center's bulletin board. One poster showed children and adults working together in a kitchen, their faces bright with concentration and joy. Another advertised a program for single parents, offering support groups and family activities. Marcus felt a flutter of something he hadn't experienced in months, something that might have been hope. Without really planning it, Marcus found himself walking into the community center with Emma beside him. The interior was warm and welcoming, with soft lighting and the sound of voices coming from various rooms. A woman at the front desk looked up with a genuine smile and asked if she could help them. Marcus hesitated, unsure how to explain what he was looking for when he wasn't entirely certain himself. Finally, he managed to ask about the cooking classes, and the woman's face lit up with enthusiasm. Her name was Lisa, and she explained that the cooking program was designed specifically for families who wanted to learn together. The classes were small and informal, focusing more on building connections than creating perfect meals. She mentioned that several single parents participated, and that the program was especially good for children who might be dealing with difficult transitions. As she spoke, Marcus watched Emma examining a display case filled with photos from previous classes, and he saw something in her expression that he hadn't seen since before the accident, a spark of genuine interest. Lisa offered to show them the kitchen where the classes took place, and Marcus found himself saying yes before he could second-guess the decision. The kitchen was spacious and bright, with multiple cooking stations and child-sized stools that would allow Emma to work comfortably alongside adults. The walls were decorated with photos of families cooking together, laughing over mixing bowls and proudly displaying their finished creations. Marcus could imagine Emma in one of those photos, her face flushed with excitement as she stirred something in a pot or carefully measured ingredients. The next Wednesday, Marcus left work early for the first time since Sarah's death. He picked up Emma from Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment and told her they were going to try something new together. Emma's reaction was cautious but interested, and during the drive to the community center, she asked more questions than she had in weeks. What would they cook? Would other children be there? Would Marcus know what to do? Her questions made him realize how long it had been since they'd had a real conversation, how much he'd missed her voice and her curiosity. The cooking class was everything Lisa had promised and more. There were 6 other families participating, including 2 other single fathers who welcomed Marcus with understanding smiles and no awkward questions about his situation. The instructor, Chef Maria, had a warm, patient manner that immediately put both Marcus and Emma at ease. She explained that they would be making homemade pasta with a simple tomato sauce, a recipe that was forgiving for beginners but impressive enough to make everyone feel accomplished. Working side by side with Emma, Marcus discovered something he'd forgotten about his daughter. She was naturally curious about how things worked, asking thoughtful questions about why certain ingredients went together and what would happen if they changed the proportions. Her small hands were surprisingly capable as she helped measure flour and crack eggs, and when she accidentally spilled some olive oil on the counter, she giggled instead of crying. The sound of her laughter hit Marcus like a physical force, reminding him of all the joy that had been missing from their lives. The other families in the class created an atmosphere of gentle camaraderie. Children helped children, adults offered encouragement and advice, and nobody seemed to judge when someone made a mistake. Marcus found himself relaxing for the first time in months, actually enjoying the process of learning something new instead of worrying about whether he was doing it perfectly. When Emma successfully rolled out her first piece of pasta dough, her face glowed with pride, and Marcus felt tears threatening for reasons that had nothing to do with sadness. During the meal they prepared together, sitting around a large communal table with the other families, Emma ate more than Marcus had seen her consume in weeks. She chatted with the other children about school and favorite foods, and when one of the other single fathers complimented her pasta-making skills, she beamed with confidence. Marcus realized that this was the first time since Sarah's death that Emma had been in an environment where she felt normal, where being part of a single-parent family wasn't something that made her different or sad. The drive home was filled with Emma's chatter about the class, her plans for what they might cook next week, and her excitement about showing Mrs. Rodriguez the container of leftover pasta they were bringing home. Marcus found himself really listening to her voice, engaging with her enthusiasm instead of just nodding absently while his mind wandered to work problems. When they reached their apartment, Emma surprised him by asking if they could cook something together before the next class. Maybe try making the pasta recipe again to see if they could remember all the steps. That night, as Marcus tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at him with an expression that was more open than he'd seen in months. She told him that she'd had fun at the cooking class, that she liked seeing him smile and laugh with the other parents. Then, in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, she said that she thought Mommy would have liked seeing them cook together too. The comment hit Marcus with unexpected force, but instead of the crushing grief he'd grown accustomed to, he felt something lighter, a sense that maybe they could honor Sarah's memory by building new traditions instead of just mourning the old ones. Over the following weeks, the cooking classes became the highlight of both their weeks. Marcus found himself looking forward to Wednesday evenings in a way he hadn't anticipated anything in months. Emma's confidence grew with each session, and she began suggesting recipes they might try at home. Their apartment kitchen, which had been largely unused since Sarah's death except for reheating takeout containers, slowly came back to life. Emma insisted on keeping a notebook where she recorded their cooking experiments, complete with drawings and notes about what worked and what didn't. The changes extended beyond the kitchen. Emma began talking more about her day at school, sharing stories about her teachers and classmates instead of just shrugging when Marcus asked how things went. She started sleeping better, no longer crying herself to sleep most nights. Marcus noticed that she'd begun humming while doing her homework, a habit she'd inherited from Sarah that had disappeared after the accident. The return of these small signs of happiness felt like victories worth celebrating. Marcus's relationship with the other parents in the cooking class also deepened. He found himself particularly drawn to conversations with David, another single father whose wife had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. David's son Tommy was 9, and watching how David navigated the challenges of single parenthood gave Marcus both hope and practical advice. David didn't pretend that the journey was easy, but he demonstrated that it was possible to build a meaningful life after devastating loss. Through David, Marcus learned about other resources for single parents in their community. There was a Saturday morning program at the local library where children could participate in activities while parents attended support groups. There were family hiking groups, movie nights, and even camping trips designed for single-parent families. Marcus had been so focused on just surviving each day that he hadn't realized how much support was available, how many other people were facing similar challenges. The transformation wasn't immediate or without setbacks. There were still difficult evenings when Emma missed her mother with an intensity that nothing could comfort. There were still moments when Marcus felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of raising a daughter alone, when he questioned every decision and worried that he wasn't enough. But the cooking classes had given them a foundation, a shared activity that created opportunities for connection and communication they hadn't had before. 3 months into the cooking program, Chef Maria announced that the class would be preparing a special meal for their families and friends, a graduation celebration of sorts. Emma was thrilled by the idea and immediately began planning who she wanted to invite. She insisted that Mrs. Rodriguez must come, and after some thought, she decided to invite her teacher, Miss Peterson, as well. Marcus was touched by Emma's thoughtfulness and impressed by her growing confidence in social situations. The evening of the celebration meal was magical in ways Marcus hadn't expected. Emma wore her favorite dress and helped Marcus set up decorations she'd made at home. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived early with a bouquet of flowers for Emma, and Miss Peterson brought a card signed by all of Emma's classmates. Watching Emma proudly explain each dish they'd prepared, seeing her laugh and interact easily with the guests, Marcus felt a profound sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with work or achievements in any traditional sense. During the meal, David pulled Marcus aside for a quiet conversation. He told Marcus that he'd noticed how much both he and Emma had changed over the past few months, how they seemed more connected and at ease with each other. David shared that in his experience, the most important thing wasn't being a perfect parent, but being a present one, being willing to try new things and admit when you needed help. He said that Marcus should be proud of the progress he'd made, that choosing to take the cooking class had been an act of courage that was already paying dividends. That night, after the guests had gone home and Emma was asleep, Marcus sat in his kitchen looking at the photos Emma had taken throughout the evening. In one picture, she was standing on her step stool, carefully stirring a pot, while Marcus watched with an expression of pure attention. In another, she was laughing at something Mrs. Rodriguez had said while holding up a perfectly rolled piece of pasta. But the photo that struck him most was one that Miss Peterson had taken without him noticing, showing Marcus and Emma working side by side, both focused on their cooking but clearly comfortable in each other's presence. Looking at these photos, Marcus realized that they'd created something new together, something that honored Sarah's memory while also building toward their future. The cooking classes had taught them more than just how to prepare meals. They'd learned how to be together again, how to find joy in simple activities, how to build traditions that were uniquely theirs. Emma had learned that her father was capable of more than she'd given him credit for, and Marcus had discovered that being a single parent didn't mean he had to do everything alone. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call that would test everything Marcus had learned about priorities and balance. His supervisor called to inform him about a promotion opportunity that would require him to relocate to another city within 6 weeks. The position came with a significant salary increase and the kind of career advancement Marcus had been working toward for years. Under normal circumstances, it would have been an easy decision, but now he found himself considering factors that had never mattered before. Emma's reaction to the news was immediate and heartbreaking. She burst into tears and begged him not to make the move, not to take her away from her school, her friends, Mrs. Rodriguez, and especially their cooking class. She'd finally found stability and happiness again, and the thought of starting over in a new place felt overwhelming to her. Marcus realized that the promotion he might have jumped at 6 months earlier now felt like a threat to the progress they'd made together. That evening, Marcus called David to talk through the decision. David listened without judgment as Marcus explained the professional opportunity and Emma's reaction. When Marcus finished, David was quiet for a long moment before asking a simple question that cut to the heart of the matter. He asked Marcus what kind of life he wanted to build with Emma, whether career success or family stability felt more important at this moment in their lives. The question forced Marcus to confront priorities he'd never had to examine before Sarah's death. Over the next few days, Marcus found himself paying closer attention to the life he and Emma had begun building together. He noticed how Emma's face lit up when she talked about their upcoming cooking class, how she'd started making friends with children from other single-parent families they'd met through the community center, how she'd grown comfortable with Mrs. Rodriguez in a way that felt like family. He realized that they weren't just surviving anymore. They were actually thriving in ways that had nothing to do with his career achievements. The decision became clear during their regular Wednesday cooking class. Emma was teaching a newer participant, a shy 6-year-old named Sophie, how to knead bread dough. Marcus watched as his daughter patiently demonstrated the technique, offering encouragement when Sophie's first attempts didn't go perfectly. The confidence and kindness Emma displayed reminded Marcus so much of Sarah that he felt his breath catch. But this wasn't just Sarah's influence. This was Emma growing into her own person, developing strengths and qualities that were uniquely hers. After class, Marcus asked Emma if she'd like to go for ice cream, just the two of them. As they sat in their favorite booth at the small diner near the community center, Marcus told Emma about his decision. He explained that while the job opportunity was attractive, he'd realized that some things were more important than career advancement. He'd decided to turn down the promotion and focus on building their life where they were, surrounded by the community and relationships they'd worked so hard to develop. Emma's relief was so profound that she started crying. But these were tears of happiness and gratitude rather than fear. She told Marcus that she'd been worried he would choose work over her, the way he had in the months immediately after Sarah's death. Her honesty was difficult to hear, but Marcus was grateful for it. It helped him understand how much his previous behavior had affected her sense of security and how important his current choices were for rebuilding her trust in their relationship. The conversation that followed was one of the most honest they'd ever had. Emma talked about how scared she'd been after Sarah died, not just because she missed her mother, but because Marcus had seemed so distant and overwhelmed. She explained that she'd try to be good and not cause problems because she was afraid that if she was too much trouble, something might happen to Marcus too. The revelation broke Marcus's heart, but it also helped him understand Emma's recent quietness and compliance in a new light. Marcus apologized to Emma for the ways he'd failed her in the early months after Sarah's death, explaining that he'd been learning how to be her father in a completely new way. He promised that while he might still make mistakes, he would never again let work become more important than their relationship. He told her that she never had to worry about being too much trouble, that being her father was the most important job he would ever have. The months that followed this conversation brought a deepening of their relationship that Marcus had never imagined possible. Emma began sharing more about her feelings, both about missing Sarah and about her hopes for their future together. Marcus learned to recognize the signs when Emma was having a particularly difficult day, and he developed strategies for providing comfort that didn't require him to fix everything immediately. Sometimes, he discovered, the most helpful thing was simply sitting with her while she cried, acknowledging her pain without trying to make it disappear. Their cooking skills continued to improve, and they began hosting dinner parties for their friends from the community center. Emma took pride in planning menus and helping with preparations, and Marcus enjoyed watching her confidence grow as she interacted with their guests. These gatherings became important milestones in their healing process, opportunities to celebrate their progress and strengthen the relationships that had become so crucial to their well-being. On the first anniversary of Sarah's death, Marcus and Emma decided to cook Sarah's favorite meal together, a complex Indian curry that had always intimidated Marcus when Sarah made it. They spent the entire day in the kitchen, working slowly through the recipe and talking about their memories of Sarah. Emma shared stories Marcus had never heard, small moments between mother and daughter that painted a picture of Sarah's daily love and attention. Marcus contributed his own memories, describing how Sarah had brought laughter and adventure into his previously ordered life. The meal wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, created with love and intention in honor of the woman who had brought them together. As they ate, they didn't feel the crushing sadness that had characterized previous attempts to commemorate Sarah. Instead, they felt connected to her memory in a way that was celebratory rather than purely mournful. Emma said that she thought Sarah would be proud of how much they'd learned to cook together, and Marcus agreed, feeling Sarah's presence as a blessing rather than a painful absence. That evening, Emma asked Marcus if he thought they would be okay, really okay, in the long run. Marcus considered the question seriously before answering, recognizing that Emma needed honesty rather than empty reassurance. He told her that he believed they would not just be okay, but that they would be happy in ways that were different from before, but no less meaningful. He explained that they were learning to build a life that honored Sarah's memory while also creating new traditions and joys that were uniquely theirs. 2 years later, Marcus and Emma had become something of a success story within their community center family. New single parents often sought Marcus's advice, and Emma had become a mentor to younger children who were dealing with loss and transition. Marcus had been promoted within his current company, an advancement that came without requiring relocation and allowed him to maintain the work-life balance that had become so important to their well-being. Emma was thriving in school, having developed strong friendships and a confidence that impressed her teachers. She'd maintained her interest in cooking and had even started a small cooking club at school, teaching other children simple recipes they could make with their families. Her teacher reported that Emma often talked about the lessons she'd learned from cooking with her father, particularly the importance of patience, practice, and trying again when things didn't work out perfectly the first time. The cooking classes at the community center had evolved into a broader program that Marcus helped coordinate. He discovered an unexpected talent for program development and had worked with Lisa to expand the offerings to include financial planning workshops, homework help sessions, and recreational activities for single-parent families. The work was volunteer-based but deeply fulfilling, giving Marcus a sense of purpose that complemented rather than competed with his role as Emma's father. On a Wednesday evening in spring, as Marcus and Emma worked together to prepare dinner for their weekly meal with David and Tommy, Emma made an observation that struck Marcus with its maturity and insight. She said that she thought their family might be different from other families, but that didn't make it worse, just unique. She explained that she'd learned things about cooking and about life that many of her friends hadn't experienced, and that she felt proud of how far she and Marcus had come together. Marcus realized that Emma was right, that they had indeed created something unique and valuable together. Their family might not look like the traditional model, and they would always carry the sadness of Sarah's absence. But they had built something strong and loving from the ashes of their loss. The cooking classes had been just the beginning, a catalyst that had helped them discover not just how to make meals together, but how to make a life together. Looking at Emma as she carefully seasoned their pasta sauce, her face focused and content, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. The scared, overwhelmed single father who had stumbled into that first cooking class felt like a different person entirely. He'd learned that being a parent wasn't about having all the answers or avoiding all mistakes. It was about showing up consistently, being willing to learn, and creating spaces for connection and growth. The timer chimed, indicating that their bread was ready, and Emma clapped her hands with excitement. As they pulled the golden loaves from the oven, filling the kitchen with warmth and the rich scent of fresh bread, Marcus understood that this was what happiness looked like for them now. It wasn't the dramatic, passionate joy he'd known with Sarah, but it was steady and real and deeply satisfying. It was the happiness of small accomplishments, shared meals, and the daily choice to build something beautiful together despite loss and uncertainty. That night, as Marcus tucked Emma into bed, she told him about her plans for the cooking demonstration she would give at school the following week. She'd chosen to teach her classmates how to make the pasta they'd learned in their very first cooking class, the recipe that had started their journey together. She wanted to explain to her classmates that cooking wasn't just about food, but about spending time with people you love, about learning new things together, and about creating memories that would last forever. As Marcus turned off Emma's bedroom light and headed to his own room, he reflected on the unexpected directions their lives had taken. The tragedy that had threatened to destroy their family had ultimately led them to discover strengths and connections they might never have found otherwise. The community center that had been a desperate refuge had become a second home. The cooking skills that had seemed impossibly daunting had become a source of pride and connection. Most importantly, the relationship between Marcus and Emma had evolved from the tentative, grief-stricken dynamic of their early months alone into something deep and resilient and full of genuine affection. They had learned to talk to each other, to depend on each other, and to find joy in their shared experiences. They had discovered that a family could be rebuilt from love and intentionality, that happiness could be found again even after devastating loss. In the quiet of his bedroom, Marcus opened the photo album Emma had given him for his birthday, filled with pictures from their cooking adventures over the past 2 years. The progression was remarkable, from their nervous first attempts at pasta making to their confident preparation of complex holiday meals. But more striking than their culinary improvement was the change in their faces, the way their expressions had relaxed and brightened, the way their body language had shifted from cautious distance to comfortable closeness. The final photo in the album was one that Mrs. Rodriguez had taken the previous week, showing Marcus and Emma working side by side in their kitchen at home. They were making Sarah's Indian curry again, this time for a potluck dinner at the community center. In the photo, Emma was standing on her familiar step stool, stirring a pot, while Marcus chopped vegetables nearby. Both of their faces showed concentration, but also contentment, the easy familiarity of two people who had learned to work together seamlessly. Looking at this image, Marcus felt a deep sense of completion, not because their journey was over, but because he finally understood what they were building together. They were creating a life that honored their past while embracing their future, a family that could withstand challenges because it was built on authentic connection rather than just shared circumstances. They had learned that love could survive loss, that families could be rebuilt, and that sometimes the most profound growth came from the most unexpected beginnings. As Marcus fell asleep that night, he was already looking forward to the next day's adventures with Emma, to their ongoing cooking experiments, to the community relationships that continued to enrich their lives, and to the countless small moments that would add up to a lifetime of shared happiness. The scared, lonely man who had walked into that community center 2 years earlier could never have imagined the richness of the life that awaited him and his daughter, but Marcus was grateful every day that they had found the courage to take that first step together into something new.